So we're using RoleCatcher to take a deep dive into technical sales for office machinery and equipment. There's just something about those big, complex machines that keep offices humming along.
It really is fascinating. It's this interesting mix of knowing the ins and outs of the tech A&D, being able to sell it.
Right. It's not just about pushing paper anymore. So let's dive into what RoleCatcher says about this career path. They use this phrase, liaison with advanced technical knowledge. What does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, imagine this. You're explaining the wonders of a high-volume scanner, network integration, and, document security software to someone who still prints out their emails. You're bridging the gap between complex tech and those who might not be as tech savvy.
It's like you're fluent in both tech and plain English. And speaking of changes in how we work, how does the rise of e-commerce impact this field? I mean, are people even buying physical office equipment anymore?
That's the thing. It's a double-edged sword. You've got companies now offering print as a service, which directly competes with selling physical printers, so salespeople have to get creative. It's not enough to just sell a copier anymore. You're selling the whole package, maintenance, software, security, you name it.
So it's almost like the rise of online shopping makes that face-to-face personalized service even more valuable.
Exactly. It's all about building that trust, improving your expertise. Clients need to know that you get their needs, even if they can't articulate it themselves.
It makes sense that RoleCatcher emphasizes skills like active listening and reading comprehension. Those might seem obvious, but I can see how they'd be crucial here.
You're not just selling a product, right? You're like a trusted advisor for all things office tech. And that means carefully listening to their needs, understanding those dense product descriptions, and then translating all that into a sales pitch that clicks.
So it's a lot more nuanced and consultative than just try to make a sale.
Absolutely. You're finding the solution that fits, even if it's not the priciest option. And that takes digging deep to understand their workflows and what's not working.
Okay, so we know what they do, but how does someone actually get into this field? RoleCatcher had some advice on that, right?
Yeah, the stress experience, like internships, entry-level jobs, even volunteering for projects where you're, actually fixing office equipment.
So don't just say you can fix a paper jam, prove it. But it sounds like there's more to it than just that. RoleCatcher also mentioned career progression. How do you go from newbie to seasoned pro in this field?
Right. So the guide laid out a pretty clear path. You start at the entry level, maybe doing some shadowing, learning the ropes, maybe even helping with like market research or prepping presentations. And then you move up to junior technical sales representative, then senior, and eventually you could even become a technical sales manager.
So it's a lot of hands-on learning in the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. But as you gain more experience, you get more autonomy. Junior reps often get their own territories, making sales calls, closing deals on their own. But the learning never really stops. RoleCatcher was big on continuous development, even for senior people. Attending industry events, taking courses, staying on top of new tech, that's how you become a real expert. And how you move into leadership.
So anyone can learn the basics, the features, and benefits, but to really thrive, you need to become a trusted advisor who gets those office setups. Speaking of which, I was really impressed with RoleCatcher's interview question library. Those were tough. They were more about real-life situations and less about the, sell me this pen type of thing.
Oh, totally. Yeah. They really make you think. Like, one question was, how do you handle objections from clients during a sales pitch? And that's something every salesperson will deal with at some point. It's so important to have a strategy for that.
Right. It's one thing to talk about your sales process in theory, and another to actually deal with a frustrated client who's convinced their copier is haunted.
Exactly. And that's where those interpersonal skills are key, right?
Yeah.
It's not enough to just know the tech stuff. You have to connect with people, listen to them, and build that trust.
Makes sense. RoleCatcher also talked about building a strong network, like joining associations, going to conferences, using LinkedIn, that kind of thing.
It's so important. It's not just about selling to some faceless company. It's about building relationships. And those connections can lead to great opportunities down the line.
It's like you're building a community, not just a client list. Okay, but let's be real for a second. RoleCatcher also talked about the downsides of this career path. What stood out to you?
Well, the earning potential was definitely a plus.
Yeah.
But they also mentioned how competitive it can be. You're always trying to get clients, hit those sales targets, and prove your worth. It's not for everyone.
So you need to be okay with a little or maybe a lot of pressure.
Oh, for sure. You need to be resilient, able to think on your feet, and always willing to go the extra mile. They also talked about long hours, which I guess is pretty standard in sales, but something to be aware of.
Right, but it sounds like it could be worth it for the right person. It does sound like a career with some serious potential, especially for someone who likes a fast-paced environment.
And who loves tech? I mean, you're working with the latest and greatest office equipment, figuring out how it all works, how to fix it, and then explaining it to people who might not be as tech savvy.
Right, it's like you're a tech translator bridging the gap between the ones and zeros and the people who just want to print their documents.
Exactly. And you have to constantly be learning and adapting, which is something RoleCatcher emphasized a lot. This isn't a field where things stay the same for long. It's always evolving.
Speaking of evolving, we haven't even touched on the elephant in the room, remote work. What's been the impact on office machinery and equipment with everyone working from home?
It's definitely shaking things up. You might think, well, who needs a fancy copier if everyone's working from their kitchen table?
Ah,
But it's not that simple.
because even home offices need equipment, right?
Of course. They still need printers, scanners, sometimes even webcams and conferencing systems. But now the sales pitch is different. You're helping them set up a really great home office experience.
So it's less about outfitting a whole floor of an office building and more about tailoring solutions to individual home offices. That's got to be a whole different ballgame.
It is. And it requires a different kind of tech know-how. Home office setups might involve working with all sorts of operating systems, troubleshooting internet issues, even providing remote support. A whole new world of challenges, but also a ton of new opportunities.
It sounds like anyone going into this field needs to be adaptable, tech savvy, and maybe a little bit of a tech therapist for those remote workers struggling to connect to the printer.
Absolutely. It's a dynamic field,
Yeah.
and it takes a unique set of skills, but for the right person, it can be incredibly rewarding.
Well said. This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the world of technical sales representatives for office machinery and equipment. We talked about the role itself, the skills you need, the career path you could take, the impact of e-commerce, remote work, even how to prep for those tough interview questions, all thanks to RoleCatcher.
It's been my pleasure breaking it all down with you.
And for our listeners, here's a final thought. With all the advancements in artificial intelligence and automation, how do you think this role might evolve for the next decade? Something to consider as you explore RoleCatcher and your own career path. Thanks for joining us.